Okay, welcome to this deep dive. We've got these market review documents here, and we're really going to get into the Jamaican agricultural market.
That's right. We're focusing on the week ending June 7th, 2025.
Exactly. But, to really get what's happening now, we need to look at it alongside the week right before, the one ending May 30th.
Absolutely. The plan is basically to unpack these sources, pinpoint the really important shifts, and not just see the numbers, but understand the why behind them.
And figure out what it all means, right,
Yeah.
for folks in the market now and, well, in the coming weeks.
Precisely. Because what these papers show is sometimes the overall market looks pretty stable,
Uh-huh.
but the real action is in those big individual commodity swings, that hidden volatility.
Okay, so let's unpack it. Where should we start?
Let's rewind briefly to that previous week, ending May 30th, just to set the scene.
Right.
The overall average price change across everything, it was tiny, just a 0.43% increase, very modest.
Okay, 0.43% sounds calm. But that's where it gets interesting, doesn't it? Because that small number hits some major moves.
Exactly. The data showed this really high average volatility, 38.81% for that week.
And that volatility index, just to remind everyone, it measures how much the price for the same product varied across different places, right?
That's it. So a high number like that means, say, peppers could be one price in one parish and wildly different somewhere else. Huge variations.
Got it. And this was happening as the market was shifting, moving towards the summer growing season.
Yep. And summer usually brings, more unpredictability. Weather factors, shifts in supply, shifts in demand.
Okay, so who were the big movers back then, week ending May 30th? Any standouts?
Oh, yeah. Imported romaine lettuce was a big one. It shot up 25%.
Wow, 25% to JMD 990.000 per kilo.
Right. A jump like that often points to maybe a supply issue, like import delays, or maybe a surge in demand, hospitality, tourism maybe.
Makes sense. What else?
Green cabbage also climbed significantly, up over 10% to JMD 211.00, and that wasn't isolated.
So a broader shift for cabbage.
Seemed like it, yeah. Suggesting either generally better demand or maybe tighter supply across the board.
Okay.
Onions were up too, similar climb, over 10%. Probably related to import issues or maybe less local stuff hitting the market right then.
And there were others. Pak choy, cantaloupes.
They saw gains too, but it wasn't all uphill.
Right, there were decliners too. Who was down?
Gungo peas had a pretty significant drop actually, down over 14%.
Even though the price is still quite high.
Exactly. The data suggested maybe a big harvest came in all at once, or perhaps demand was just starting to ease off.
And sweet potatoes.
They fell quite a bit, over 10%. And that was pretty widespread across different areas.
So that might be, a seasonal glut? Too much supply?
Could be. Or just, the market getting a bit tired of them for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Local green sweet peppers also dropped over 12%.
And the notes mentioned really sharp falls in some specific areas, like St. Mary.
Yeah, which hints at maybe oversupply popping up locally, or demand just wasn't consistent across regions.
Yellow sweet peppers dipped too, especially in St. Elizabeth. And honeydew melons.
Mm-hmm. And all this just underlines that volatility point we made earlier.
Right, the indices are really high for some of these peppers.
Over 80% for green sweet peppers, over 70% for red and yellow, even Scotch bonnet, which only went up slightly overall, saw a massive 50% increase in one parish and a 20% decrease in another at the same time.
Crazy swings. So navigating that market required a very specific plan.
Absolutely. The takeaway from May 30th was you needed a targeted strategy. Those rising prices were maybe short-term chances,
Opportunities,
while the falling ones meant thinking about storage or maybe adding value somehow.
And always with that backdrop of summer, hurricane season looming, adding complexity.
Okay, so that's the context. Now let's bring it forward to the most recent data we have, the week ending June 7th.
Right. Let's look at the top price increases for this past week. Who led the pack?
Red cabbage, local red cabbage, jumped up the most, a sharp 20% increase.
20%, taking it over 1,000 JMD per kilo.
Yeah, J10 dollars and $58.75 on average. Seems like a classic case of steady demand hitting limited supply.
Okay. And what else was climbing?
Local sweet peppers did really well again, but this time the colorful ones. Red sweet pepper up 18%, yellow sweet pepper up almost 17%.
So strong demand for those colorful, high-quality peppers.
Looks like it. Consumers like them, and you've got restaurants, hotels, maybe even export buyers pushing up demand. J shade at $1,500 for red, J Haven at $11 for yellow on average.
Interesting. And green sweet pepper, because that was down the previous week.
Right. This week it climbed over 16%, hitting around J $380.
So a quick turnaround shows how fast things can change.
Definitely, despite those supply inconsistencies mentioned before. And Sorrel was up too, by 15%.
Sorrel. Any thoughts on why? Maybe early festival demand or just less around in the off-season?
Could be either, yeah. Lower availability seems likely, fetching about J 1051.1.
And it's striking how local produce dominated that gainers list this week.
Very noticeable, yeah.
Okay, now for the other side of the coin. The biggest price decreases for the week ending June 7th.
Top of the list, experiencing the most dramatic drop, was imported romaine lettuce, down 20%.
Wow, that's a huge swing from being the top gainer the week before.
Exactly. And here's the really fascinating part when you compare the weeks. It dropped 20% this week to land at exactly J $990 per kilogram.
Wait, $9.90. That's the same price it soared to the previous week when it jumped 25%?
Precisely the same average price. It went from top gainer to top faller, ending up right back where it peaked.
That is quite something. It really highlights how specific pressures, like maybe a big shipment finally landing or buyers suddenly shifting focus, can just flip everything.
Absolutely tells a story. What else was down? Imported broccoli dipped a bit, over 9%.
Still very expensive, though, over J 2,200 kilograms. Maybe hitting a saturation point.
That's a good possibility, yeah.
Yeah.
Market might be resisting that high price. Local pineapple, the ND2 variety, was down over 8%.
Maybe peak harvest time, more volume hitting the market.
Very likely. Average price around J, $508. Watermelon also saw a decline, about 5.4%.
Seasonal glut again, maybe? Or perhaps the rainy weather affected demand?
Both plausible reasons. Average J, $467. And local pumpkin fell slightly too, about 5%, down to J, $315.
Maybe some quality issues there, or just buyers looking elsewhere this week.
Could be. So let's try and connect these dots. How does this June 7th picture compare to May 30th?
Well, we've got different specific items leading the gains and losses, clearly.
Yeah, the cast of characters changed.
But that underlying theme, it feels the same. Beneath any small average change, you've got these significant, sometimes really dramatic individual commodity movements.
The volatility is still very much the story. Even if we don't have the exact index number from this second source excerpt, it's implied by these swings.
And that whole transition to summer, the potential weather impacts we mentioned earlier, that's definitely still in play, right? These shifts could easily be tied to harvest timing, import schedules, early seasonal effects.
Absolutely relevant. Which brings us to the implications for you, the listener.
Right, whether you're farming, trading, and hospitality buying produce, or even just doing the weekly grocery shop.
Yeah.
What does all this mean?
It means these price movements aren't abstract. They hit availability, they hit your costs, they dictate the strategies you need.
Yeah, do you buy now? Do you wait? If you're selling, where do you sell?
It really reinforces the main takeaway from looking at both these weeks of data. You cannot just look at the average price change. It's only a tiny piece of the puzzle.
You have to dig deeper. Look at specific commodities, understand the drivers.
Exactly. What's happening with local supply? What about demand, imports, seasonality? And always, always keeping an eye on potential weather disruptions.
So, wrapping up our deep dive into these documents, the Jamaican agricultural market is dynamic, to say the least.
Definitely not static. We're seeing these big, sometimes really wild swings week to week, driven by local conditions, imports, seasons, demand, all of it interacting.
It's a market that really seems to reward paying close attention, doesn't it? Commodity by commodity, week by week.
Absolutely. And given this ongoing volatility and, the seasonal factors like the hurricane season that was mentioned in the earlier data, here's a thought to leave you with.
Okay.
How much more critical does resilience and adaptability become? Thinking about farming practices, supply chain management, even how you source things. How crucial will that flexibility be for navigating the weeks and months ahead in this kind of environment?
That's a really important question to ponder. Great point. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.